Who can stand against the might of Zargon the Returner? Surely no man is strong enough of courage and skill to face my master in combat. No god would dare confront him, for he has brought low others before. Nay, when Zargon awakens, all shall tremble as the world is born anew in his foul image.
Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time and have a huge collection of videos for you to binge watch, and I upload 2 new videos per week usually, with a live stream each weekend as well. If you like what I do, please consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button below, or backing me on Subscribestar or Patreon, where you can get access to all the scripts I write for these vids, if you prefer to read what I'm saying. I also have a Discord server with an active community, and of course, if you think I've earned it, subscribe to the channel. Somewhere there is a dusty and desolate desert region, an unnatural place that could be nestled in a great mountain range, or be in a remote part of a long-lost empire now swallowed by the sands of time. This region is not uninhabited. In fact, it's highly likely that explorers will run into one of the 2 nomadic factions who constantly feud and battle each other over the very sparse resources they desperately need to survive here. And to make matters worse, none of even these fierce people will go anywhere near the center of the desert. They will tell you that it is the home of a terrible dragon who will kill any who dare venture near its lair, and what's more, it guards some terrible cursed ruin from which none have ever returned, alive or dead. One thing is for sure though, thanks to the plots and backstabbing habits of the desert nomads and the nearly lethal nature of the desert environment itself, the explorers are almost certain to have to venture into the heart of the desert and the terrors that it holds. This is the lost city of Synadesia, one of the 30 greatest Dungeons & Dragons adventures of all time. Although this was originally designed for the Mystara setting for D&D Basic back in 1982 by Tom Moldvay, it is one of the more adaptable adventure modules, and you can set it on Greyhawk or faerun or your own homebrew world as you please. It is very much self-contained thanks to the thematic elements that make it such a classic style of adventure. You can also find the lurking Elder Evil who resides within the city in the pages of Elder Evils for 3.5 edition D&D, a fairly faithful recreation of the original adventure and the formidable threat which is Zargon the Returner. My aim here is not to just talk about Zargon the Elder Evil, it's also to describe the elements that make this adventure work so well. The secret is outlandish hats. But more on that in a moment, and forgive me if I wander around the lore a bit in this video and refer to a lot of things that those of you who are new to my channel may not have heard about yet. All I can say is there is a lot of videos to catch up on. I cover all of this in other videos. All will become clearer. For the rest of you, grab yourself a beverage of choice, settle back. We're about to get deeply nerdy. Zargon is a supernatural entity that may be one of the original native inhabitants of Beator, which rose up to completely dominate it and its associated demiplanes or layers. That later became known as the 9 Hells, once Asmodeus and his fallen angels arrived to take it over and become known as the Devils. The early history of the Hells is shrouded in misinformation and legends, as you'd expect, but Zargon was certainly a part of that place once. There are also valid rumours that Zargon was originally a demon of the Abyss, who was somehow banished from there and took up residence in Beator before being evicted again and ending up trapped on the prime material plane. So, what is true? Well, perhaps there was an original timeline for the D&D Multiverse where the Abyss existed before the 9 Hells, and Beator was a planet in the prime material plane that somehow got swallowed up by it and became a layer of the Abyss. And a powerful Oberth basically tore it and 8 other layers of the Abyss completely free and transported all of it to one of the other lower planes where it became the 9 Hells, which certainly explains why this is one of the more accessible places from one to the other, linked by the river Styx among other things. Before Asmodeus fell from Celestia along with the other angels, Beator was an infernal realm where evil mortal souls collected as disgusting soul larvae, which eventually transformed into bloated Nuparibo Beatorians. It was not until the fallen angels arrived that Nuparibos were transformed down into lemures, and from there became the new devils. Before that, the Nuperibos matured into monstrous humanoids with tentacles sprouting from their belly and with a remarkable self-regeneration powers. It took them an extraordinary long time to evolve to this state though. Thing is, this was not a natural occurrence that spontaneously happened, nor was it the work of the dictates of the gods. It was actually an engineered horror made by a much, much older species, the vile and pure evil Baneloths, who saw to it that the most evil and wretched souls were gathered in the lower planes and were transformed into larvae instead of the usual form of petitioners that you would find on other planes. I should also note that Celestia also transforms petitioners into a specific form, that of the Lantern Archons. To this day, Yugoloths are known to accept Nuperibos as soul currency and use them also as food. On Baator, there were many other forms of these proto-Baatorians, though perhaps an ecosystem? Perhaps just multiple experiments by the Baneloths? So there were once these spiny things on the 8th land named Cania, who remain locked in ice, along with frozen angels they seem to have been battling near abandoned cities of alien design, also frozen in the ice. There's the Amnesus, who patrolled and controlled the River Styx. The Dark Dogai, who were all captured and transformed by Asmodeus into the assassin devils that they are today. The stalking life stealers that absorbed light and vitality and who knows what else. There are some who believe that these original Baatorians may in fact be original essences of powers, former gods, minor gods of lost creatures and cultures. Their version of the multiverse, now long lost as time itself has got altered and again. Just more evil riffraff and loose ends from realities that are no more within the prime material plane but have echoes left behind, shadows and fragments in the outer planes. As well as all that, there is also Zargon and some native Baatorian super oozers called Corruptures, of which he was most certainly their master. Zargon is unbelievably old, and as far as anyone knows, despite the best efforts of demons, gods, mortals and time itself, he is probably truly immortal. In physical form as he exists today, Zargon the Returner, Zargon the Devourer of the Depths, is of a variable size, somewhere between 15 and 35 feet tall. He has the head of a giant reptile with one black horn and always one large eye, though he has been depicted as having other smaller eyes. If this is any indication of a link to the greater god Tharizdun, beholders, astral dreadnoughts and so on, there has been no sign of it other than the single eye and the ability to negate powers around him. His torso sprouts 6 powerful tentacles on each side that function as arms, and another 6 tentacles that function as legs. He has a slight resemblance to Demogorgon, the Prince of Demons, I suppose, but again, Zargon most likely predates the Prince of Demons by an enormous stretch of twisted time. As an elder evil, Zargon has unusual traits that blur the line between demon, devil, and god. He does act as a warlock patron and grants his cultists spelled power, and yet he has staggeringly powerful abilities to nullify divine power and influence all around him for quite a distance. In fact, he is responsible for the destruction of quite a few divine avatars over the eons. He has qualities of a very powerful aberration, and again, similarities to Guanadaur and perhaps the ancient and utterly alien Oberiths, in that he has mastery and control over slimes and oozes. He is always surrounded by a thick pool of brown and grey goop, and he can vomit jets of concentrated acid which drools out of his maw constantly. Although the region he is in is perpetually torn into chaos by bizarre weather and fierce storms, this is not actually Zargon's doing. It's the side effect of the gods' disturbance at his presence. They say they are very wary of Zargon, and I would say that that's an understatement. Being near Zargon is not a place most mortal creatures want to be. The thick brown slime that clings to his massive form makes smoking clots that hiss and seethe as he moves. His 7-foot-long black horn is speckled with silver flecks, and it thrusts out from the centre of his forehead from a wound. A pale, noxious yellow fluid seeps out of it around the base of the horn. It crusts around the red rim of his huge eye. His torso is alien but muscular. It's crisscrossed with scars from countless injuries, including seeping wounds and tumours riddled with squirming fat parasites that pop out of his flesh like pussy geysers as he flexes and moves. His long tentacles move around constantly. Each of them are arm-like limbs tipped with some sort of wicked serrated barb, a jagged curve of organic but steel-hard horn that tears into flesh and bone with ease and is extremely difficult to get free of once Zargon has a victim hooked. When he moves, one or two of these leg tentacles move darting forward and then drag the rest of his bulk along, always leaving a stinking trail of blood-smeared slime, as well as a litter of severed fingers, bits of flesh, organs, and whatever other bits of undigested gore that slopped over him during his grotesque feeding. I'll get back to the details of combat with Zargon later in the video, but let me just advise you, be sure that your adventurers have a plan beforehand, otherwise they are fairly doomed if they invite the ire of Zargon. So how did Zargon come to be dwelling deep in the bowels of a lost city? It's a fairly long story, but it is largely the same no matter which world he happens to have ended up on. For faerun, the story goes like this. Eons earlier, as we know, Zargon had ruled Baator as the self-styled father of the ancient Baatorians. When Asmodeus and his allies seized the Nine Hells, they purged the plane of the Baatorians, enslaving them and destroying their lords. Asmodeus butchered most himself, but Zargon was resilient to the worst attacks. Asmodeus discovered that he could kill the flesh of the beast, but not the horn, so he tore it from Zargon's head and flung it out of the Hells into the material plane, where it plummeted down and pierced deep into the land of faerun on the world of Toril. Driven from the Nine Hells, Zargon's flesh slowly reformed around his horn and followed the path the horn dug as it plunged deep into the land. He crawled slowly higher and higher. It took many centuries for his form to finally reach the surface, and when he got there, he discovered Synadesia. Long ago, in the land that would become ancient Imaska, in the earliest years of its rise to civilization, a small but mighty kingdom named Synadesia rose to power. The leaders and people constructed a magnificent fortress city-state in the form of a huge pyramid built over deep enclaves of hidden caverns below and rising into the sky above. The people prospered, mastering the early forms of magic, transforming the arid desert around them into rich and fertile farmlands, advancing their magic, science, and technology. Surrounding this nation, the barbarians who clung to their old nomadic ways watched with envious eyes as Synadesians became fat, lazy, and complacent. And then they set about raiding the city-state, plundering the city's excesses. Nobody knows how it came about, but somehow a cult to an evil power grew within the city. Perhaps in response to the bloodshed, perhaps contributing to the situation. The details are lost to time and memory. But the cult of Zargon grew within the city, and for long decades the whole city slipped further and further into decline. The people suffered from barbarian raids and brutal oppression from their own depraved cultist authorities, and then finally a great horde of enraged barbarians invaded in earnest and slaughtered thousands of people, scattering them across the land. The barbarians were largely motivated by revenge, as the cult of Zargon had been hunting them down and enslaving them, secretly sacrificing them to Zargon for many, many years within the city pyramid's forbidden religious heart. The supply of non-believers and criminals within the city's own culture was never enough to satisfy the demands of Zargon's appetite. The barbarians were actually ignorant of the truth about the city's dark heart as they invaded. They discovered to their utter shock that Zargon was not some mythical, otherworldly supernatural power. And keep in mind, it was unlike any of the people of ancient Imaska to worship any gods anyway. No, Zargon was a very real and physical, terrifying monster that had at some point in the city's past burrowed up from below and now lorded over them all, demanding appalling sacrifices to appease it. The nightmare was so advanced that the very streets of the heart of Synadesia were slick with blood and slime that ran in the gutters as thick as mud. The leader of the barbarians, named Zankar, called on the gods, any god who would hear him, and fought Zargon for 7 days and nights. But even he, the greatest warrior of the time, could not beat Zargon's power to heal from any wound. Even the god's blessings on Zankar failed, and the barbarian cried out to them in despair as Zargon finally butchered the champion. The gods themselves were spurred into direct and unprecedented action as they saw that no mortal of the time would be able to stand in the raging Zargon's path and survive. They summoned forth their own avatars and sent them into battle against Zargon, but the elder evil actually mocked them even as it beat the shit out of them. He murdered a few and sent the rest packing. The Synadesian survivors, witnessing this titanic battle, truly believed that Zargon had beaten the gods themselves and the world would soon come to an end. so they fled into the caverns beneath the city pyramid, never to venture out again. Zargon seemed unstoppable, but he had one foe remaining, Asmodeus. When Zargon finally revealed his freedom, he once more had Asmodeus' full attention. Such a dire and original threat to his rule of the Nine Hells would have to be dealt with quickly. Although the death of the gods' avatars didn't really bother Asmodeus in the least, the freedom of this elder evil did. So shortly after the mortals fled into the Undercity, Asmodeus himself stepped into the world of Toril to stop Zargon for the last time. Since the Lord of Nessus was not a god at the time, he was not vulnerable to the worst of Zargon's powers. Still, he knew he could not slay the beast. Instead, he imprisoned the elder evil in solid stone, so only the horn was visible. He then turned to Zargon's Synadesian worshippers, burying them alive in the tunnels. There was still a way inside the Great Pyramid. This was covered in desert sands, and the whole place shook and slipped down, collapsing many of the caverns below, but certainly not all. And there the ill-fated people remained in hopeless isolation, believing the outside world to be nothing more than sand and blasted wastelands of chaos inhabited by archdevils and draconic monsters. The buried pyramid city of Synadesia lies in the Valley of Death within the giant spelt mountains on the edge of Rorin, the dust desert. A brown dragon makes its home in the cliff overlooking the sand-choked valley, bound here by Asmodeus and the commands of Tiamat to ensure that nothing disturbs the lost city. When the player characters show up at this location due to nomad tribes and prowling dragons and ferocious desert storms, they are left with little option but to seek shelter within the ancient city. They then kick off a whole series of events that could spell potential doom to a great many thousands of people on Faerun as Zargon City rises from the sand and the ancient evil once more gains its freedom. Inside the city there are details about what can be found there, but this is a perfect example of a self-contained civilization that has been cooped up with its own madness for a very long time. With no contact between them and the outside world, things have gotten very weird and creepy. There are plenty of examples of this in movies over the years, such as the computer-controlled city of Logan's Run, which inspired the role-playing game called Paranoia, to the dystopian nightmare mega-city of Judge Dredd. Generation after generation of Synadesians have lived out their lives underground. Though still human, their skin has become very pale and their hair bone white, plus they have the ability to see in the dark like goblins. Every Synadesian wears a stylized mask, usually of an animal or human face. Some are made of wood, some of paper mache, a few are even made of metal. They are decorated with beads, bones, precious feathers and jewels. Most Synadesians wear fancy clothes, flashy jewellery and carry short swords. Some paint their bodies with bright colours. The Synadesians are a dying race, their population decreasing with each new generation. Most of them have forgotten about the outside world, that it really exists, living most of their lives in weird dreams. They barely stay lucid long enough to gather food, water and supplies to maintain themselves at an adequate level, so sickness and mental illness is very common. Most of them prefer to live in narcotic-induced dreams than to have to deal with their stark reality. A few Synadesians are nearly normal. These Synadesians are trying to restore the worship of their old gods, Gorm, Usimagaris, and Madarua. They hope to stop the slow death of their society and regain the past glory of Synadesia. The Brotherhood of the war god named Gorm are all male fighters, such as they are. All of them wear golden masks of the face of Gorm, a long-haired bearded man with a stern gaze. Each brother also wears iron chainmail over a blue tunic. Each has the tattoo of a blue lightning bolt on their right shoulder. Adventurers who can cast spells that create bolts of lightning will be hugely respected as chosen ones of their god. The Magi of the god of healing, messages and thieves called Usimagaris are all fairly low-powered magic users who wear silver masks that resemble smiling children. They also carry silver daggers and wear rainbow-coloured robes. They have a 5-pointed star tattooed on their right palm. They go through rituals involving the secret movements of planets and stars, but don't know what they are anymore, or really what it all means. Their rituals are largely random patterns which the leaders ascribe whatever meanings are the most politically convenient for them. The warrior maidens worship the goddess of birth, death, and something that used to be called seasons, named Madarua. This all-female faction wears bronze masks, crafted to look like beautiful women. They also wear bronze chainmail armour over green tunics. Each maiden has a small sickle-shaped scar on the inside of her left wrist. The three factions do not get along well. Each faction is sure that only its members know the proper way to restore the lost greatness of Synadesia. Often when members of different factions meet, they argue and fight. This means the cultists of Zargon never have to deal with all three factions at the same time in an alliance against them. Within the bizarre buried pyramid city there are chambers of Fungus Gardens, weirdly mutated and adapted livestock. Like domesticated vermin and elemental water sources, you can encounter giant centipedes, cave locusts, giant ferrets, deep gnomes and goblins who have found their way to sneak into the city through the deep caverns long ago that connected the Underdark, and other creatures like bats, cave baboons, white cobras, the occasional ancient undead entombed in remnants of the culture of prehistory. Most of the people who are not members of one faction or the other have their own little petty domains they have ensconced themselves in, spending most of their time taking drugs and doing anything they can to stave off their horrible boredom. This is where you can get really creative as a dungeon master, as practically anything goes in an apathetic and totally isolated culture like this. Player characters should never ever trust anything a local gives them to eat or drink, and certainly expect the worst sort of manipulation for the most frivolous of reasons from them. Think about post-apocalyptic crazies. The most decadent and bored French nobles consider the status of members of society being determined by how large and ridiculously decorative their hats are, while they walk around filthy but perfumed, powdered and half naked, their clothing long ago impractical in an environment where there is no such thing as weather. Under their masks, the people's faces are inbred, gap-toothed and ugly, such that they consider the mask to be their true face, and exposed faces to be somewhat vulgar and immoral. The priests of Zargon, the fourth faction, are obviously extremely bad news and dwell in the forbidden areas behind devious traps and rotating dungeon sections that cut off passages while opening others. They are found mainly in areas outside the living and productive areas of the Pyramid City, concentrated in the lower levels and the ancient caverns below the superstructure. They have a secret underground city in a huge chamber which includes a lake with an island and a glowing mini-volcano on a distant cliff face across the waters. I like to add a flow of lava over the cliff like a glowing waterfall of molten rock that creates a sulphurous fog over the water and a steamy atmosphere that makes the whole city slick and kind of slimy. Now, more details on Zargon himself. You can find an excellent 5th edition homebrew version of Zargon on the D&D Beyond website. Link in the description for this video down below. This was created by Spelljammer creator and is a CR 30, huge, evil lawful fiend. Though Elder Evils don't exactly fit the restricted definitions for creature types you can select from the website, it's close enough. Natural armor class of 21 up to 624 hit points maximum, total immunity to acids and poisons, resistance, taking half damage from cold, fire, non-silvered, non-magical physical attacks, immunity to being charmed, exhausted or frightened with a blind sight out to 500 feet, 60 foot dark vision, 120 foot true sight and passive perception of 19. A ton of skill bonuses, telepathy to a staggering range of 1000 feet and the ability to understand and communicate in all forms of language. A formidable intelligence of 21, which also is the base stat for his spellcasting. He casts using innate abilities. At will, he can cast Freedom of Movement and Magic Circle. 3 times per day, he can cast Lightning Bolt. One of Zargon's most remarkable abilities is called Divine Innovation, which shuts down divine power over a huge range. All divine spellcasters lose the ability to regain their spells so long as they remain within 100 miles of Zargon. This interdiction does not interfere with their spellcasting, but they can't regain their spells once they've spent them. He's also immune to all divinely sourced divination spells and can't be targeted by any divination magic or perceived through magical scrying senses. He is all but invisible to mythical forces, even at very close range. His lowest stat is his dexterity, but that's still 15, and he has amazing regeneration. As long as Zargon's horn is still attached to his body, he heals 50 hit points at the start of each of his turns. If any of his limbs are severed, he can reattach them in one turn by simply holding the limb to the location it was severed from. Zargon's horn grants him regeneration and his resistances to cold and fire damage. Removing the horn requires a successful melee weapon attack followed by a DC 30 strength check. Removing the horn causes Zargon to lose those regeneration and resistance benefits. The detached horn is able to completely reform Zargon over 1d4 days if the rest of his body is destroyed. There is lore that the horn can be destroyed if it is dropped into the volcanic caldera called the Eye of Zargon across the lake beyond the secret city below the pyramid, but only if the horn is thrown in there within 1 day of Zargon's destruction. Zargon is a Lord of Slime. Any creatures damaged by Zargon's bite attack must succeed on a DC 25 Constitution save or become polluted with the slime. Each day, the victim must succeed on another save or take 3d6 points of acid damage. Victims reduced to 0 hit points whilst infected, like this, lapse into a puddle of foul slime, dead. Zargon can then choose to reanimate these slime pools into creatures he calls the whelps of Zargon. They retain none of their previous abilities. Only a heal spell or stronger magic will cure this condition, returning them back to life. In direct melee combat, he is a whirlwind of death. Zargon makes 12 melee attacks with his tentacles, 1 gore and 1 bite attack during the round, and he may spew slime and summon ooze minions. I suggest you treat Zargon as a legendary creature. Give him 6 tentacle attacks, a gore and a bite attack on his turn, plus the following legendary action options. He has 3 legendary actions which take place at the end of another creature's turn during the rest of the round. He can spend 1 action to make 2 melee tentacle attacks against any target within 30 feet. He may spend 2 actions to summon an ooze minion, but he can only do this up to 3 times per day, or he can spend all 3 actions to vomit up and spew slime. His tentacle attacks have a reach of 30 feet, are plus 19 to hit 1 target, and inflict 2d6 plus 10 bludgeoning damage. The attack will do critical damage if the attack die rolls a natural 19 or 20. If Zargon makes a successful tentacle attack against a large or smaller creature, he can attempt to grapple the creature as a bonus action with a successful opposed strength check. On a success, the creature is grappled and takes an additional 2d6 plus 10 bludgeoning damage at the start of each of its turns. The creature can escape the grapple with a successful DC 25 strength check. His bite and gore attacks both have a 15-foot reach, strike 1 target, and are plus 19 to hit. The bite inflicts 2d6 plus 10 piercing damage, plus an additional 3d6 acid damage, and don't forget that infection with the slime as well, and the gore inflicts 3d6 plus 10 piercing damage. When he spews slime, he releases a cone of brown slime that is 60 feet long. All living creatures within the area must succeed on a DC 21 dexterity save or take 10d6 points of acid damage. The damage is halved on a successful save. Creatures damaged by the slime must succeed on a DC 25 Constitution save or become polluted with Zargon slime as though they got bitten. And I would rule they also suffer from the poison condition until they can make another saving throw while they're fighting this infection. They haven't yet died. When Zargon summons an ooze, these are no ordinary types. Zargon summons these creatures called corruptures. Corruptures are 15-foot wide, tan, green and mustard yellow slimes that can weigh several tons. They are equally at home on land and in water. However, they are acid-spitting oozes that spontaneously grow in areas where nature has been severely disrupted. I suggest using the stats for the huge grey ooze from Waterdeep Legends of the Mad Mage adventure. It has the same sort of acid-spewing attack that Zargon has, though far less potent. In Zargon's slime pit, if you defeat him or distract him and manage to search around for treasure, you can uncover 58,000 silver pieces, 9,000 platinum pieces, a suit of +2 chainmail, a +2 shield, a +2 spear, a cursed scroll that turns the reader into a 3-foot tall version of Zargon with none of his powers, a wand of illusion with 7 charges, and the cloak and boots of elvenkind, the remnants of previous adventuring parties, no doubt. Please hit the like button if you made it this far. Subscribe if you like what I do. Check out my Subscribestar or Patreon. Links for all the full scripts for these videos. Buy some Teespring merchandise. Wear your geek with pride. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.